Hey folks, welcome to week 7. Dr. Walton here. I hope you are having a heck of a great week. I know I am. Let's jump into this content. All right, as usual, just a handful of items of business to get out of the way, and we will get into chapter 9. So, nothing really big or revelatory about grades. Everything should be posted for you. I've had a handful of you reach out requesting extensions, which is just fine by me. Remember, I will repeat it often. I want you to get through this class. So however we can help you do that, I'm usually game for, right? So you need an extension, you need additional attempts on an assignment. Let's talk about it, okay? Some of you are going into the week a little bit further behind than I would like you to be. I am more than happy to work with you on a catch-up plan. I know that various other people have probably been reaching out to you. Sometimes it's good to go straight to the source. Let me know how I can help you. I want to make sure you guys are ready to move forward. Let's see, anything else this week? Anything pending? I don't think so. We do have a holiday coming up, May 31st, Memorial Day. The school is technically closed that day. I will likely be recording the lecture. Oh no, you know what? I lied. That's just Monday. For some reason, I was thinking it was the whole week. Never mind. Never mind. You are good. Lecture held per usual. Let's see. Anything else? It's kind of the long and short of it. Pretty easy week. So today we're going to, of course, talk about last week's content, all about fancy meetings, how to have good ones, how to avoid having a bad one, some of the common things that happen. And then this week we're going to jump into how you develop a presentation. Sometimes when you're leading the meeting, you're really the center of attention. You need to have a strong organizational sense and a way to go about your delivery. It's all about organization and flow. Okay, I hope that makes sense. We'll talk about it. Before we get too far into chapter 9, let's do a real quick recap of chapter 8. Chapter 9 is awesome. So I'm jumping the gun just a little bit here. But let's look back to chapter 8. Remind you what we covered last week. Remember, the 3 C's of meetings. Meetings are common, they are time consuming, but very, very costly. So remember, you need to have a good purpose in mind before you call a meeting. Understand the purposes of meetings. Are we sharing information? Are we solving problems, making decisions? Or are these social ritual activity type meetings? I want you to understand the various purposes, what you would accomplish in each of those types of meeting. Remember, you need to know the reason you're holding it. You as the meeting leader are responsible to set the tone. You will do that with your mood. You will do it by establishing rules of engagement, right? You want to be present, active, establish a good line of etiquette and goodwill with your meeting participants. Those are all keys. I want you to understand what virtual meetings are like. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Remember, there should be a very specific set of circumstances under which you actually call a meeting, right? I want you to know what those are. I want you to understand why you need an agenda, what an agenda should look like, and what your responsibility is as the meeting leader with that agenda. I want you to understand parliamentary procedure, just basically. And then I want you to make sure you have a good grasp on how you make decisions as a group, starting with brainstorming, things like allowing people to throw out any idea they want and considering all of them equally, all of those things. Those are the main things I want you to take away from chapter 8 when you are preparing for our final, okay? Okay, so that's last week. Old news. Let's talk chapter 9. This week, we are talking about developing and organizing your presentation. There's a couple of things I want to get accomplished today with this presentation. The biggest one is how an organized presentation flows from piece to piece, okay? So that's really what the bulk of this session is about. But I do want you to understand the goals for your situation, the reason you're speaking. I want you to understand that purpose. And we'll talk a little more about visual aids and their purpose and best practices here shortly, but understand why they are needed and how you would use them, okay? So that's chapter 9. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my camera and we'll get into it. Okay, so developing and organizing the presentation. Well, the thing about presentations is they're pretty common, right? But they're not always successful. You know that if you work in a business setting, business presentations can be very pervasive, meaning they're kind of everywhere, right? We meet a lot. It's kind of interesting when you think about it anthropologically. But most presentations have a purpose, right? Remember that this purpose could be formal, could be informal, but your ability to present to your colleagues, peers, etc., is going to be more important the higher up you get in your career. So it's important for you to understand how to give a good one, because as you advance, you're going to be giving more of them, okay? Your ability to give a good presentation is going to impact your outcomes as an employee, right? So how promotable you are. You may need to take into consideration an internal and an external audience when you are talking about presentations. Considering giving a presentation to your peers versus complete strangers. You need to understand the difference. Analyzing the audience is a very big key when it comes to giving a presentation. Who are these people, right? One of the things that I constantly say is that we are so worried about our right to speak freely that we don't spend enough time actually focusing on who we're speaking to. When you're thinking about your audience, you need to have some sort of idea of who they are. What do they care about? What are they interested in? Do you have a good way to help your audience understand how your presentation will affect their lives, right? It's kind of a mutual relationship you develop with your audience. There are things that you need to consider: gender, age, socioeconomic status, things like that. They all become very important when you are trying to present to a group. There are some things you can look back on, right? In your past, if you've done a class presentation or maybe a presentation where you currently work, can you, in hindsight, look back at your presentation audience and get a feel for who they were? Okay, what kind of audiences have you had in the past? And how could you have better worked on your presentation in order to appeal to those specific people? Oops. Oh, I just like skipped 10 slides forward. That was ridiculous. Sorry, folks. So outside of analyzing the audience, we need to analyze an occasion, the occasion for which you're speaking. Remember, are you just up here spouting off for no reason? Probably not. You might be giving a speech that, gosh, giving a New Year's toast, right? Or you could be teaching a lecture, giving an informative speech, or you could be presenting an argument, you know, why we need more breaks at work and why we should revisit this or that policy. There's a lot of different occasions that you might be asked to present for. How you structure your presentation will largely depend on the occasion you are speaking at and the goal of that day, what you're trying to get out of that day, okay? Before you give a presentation, you also need to analyze yourself, right? There's a little self-reflection that needs to happen here. Your text really pushes you to have a goal statement prior to your presentation, which I really kind of love. When you are making a goal statement, you are deciding what you want to get out of your presentation, and then you sort of set it up in a really measurable terms so that you know if you did it well or not, or how to improve, or how to drive yourself forward in achieving that goal. So I want to do what? How, when, where will that thing happen? What reactions are you hoping to get from your audience? Before you give any presentation, I'd like you to do a little self-analysis, be specific, and really consider that goal statement. It's a very important part of the presentation process. So you've analyzed, the reason you're here, the audience you're trying to speak to, the occasion, the goal, the purpose, that kind of thing. You've done all of that good analysis. Excellent. Okay. Let's talk about how to organize that speech or presentation. You might hear me use the word speech. Same idea. We're talking about a presentation. Okay. So all very basic presentations, speeches, even essays, if we're being honest, have a similar structure to them. There's an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, right? We're going to go through this piece by piece. I want to talk about what belongs in each of these places. So first up, the introduction. In the introduction, you need to orient your audience's attention. Sorry, missed a word there. Identify the purpose of your speech, explore the scope of everything you're going to talk about in your speech, and state your thesis. Okay, so getting attention, giving them a reason to listen, letting them know topic, your qualifications, what the whole goal is with your thesis statement. That's all very much appropriate here. So the first thing you need to do is hook your audience. You've got to entice them. You've got to grab their attention. Never start a presentation with something like, in this presentation, I will, or this presentation is about. That is not going to entice your audience. That is going to make them check out. There are several ways to hook an audience. You can read a quote, you can tell a shocking fact, tell a story, tell a joke. There's a lot of ways to get attention right off the bat. And then you need to establish your direction. You need to cover the points that you're going to cover. So tell the audience what you're going to tell them. Okay, you give your audience a broad overview in the order you plan to present them in bigger, in bigger scope later on, but you want to let them know kind of what's the plan here, what are we doing? That way they can think about the topic, they can think about the questions they might have. It's a lot like having an agenda, like we discussed last week. Just let us know where we're going, right? And then you need to get to the point, right? You need to state the thesis. So you've hooked your audience, you've overviewed your main points, and now you need to tell them, this is what I want to get out of it. When you state your thesis, you're expressing kind of the overall idea of the presentation, where you stand on it. It's usually a single sentence, and it's usually arguable, meaning you're going to state something in a way that people could technically push back on it, okay? So introduction, you're going to hook your audience, overview your main points, state your thesis, okay? Pretty easy stuff for an introduction. And then you move right into the body of your presentation. Now, in the body of your presentation, you should have several main topics and everything surrounding them. So topic A with support, topic B with support, topic C with support. In order to decide your topics, you need to figure out, like I mentioned, the job that you're trying to get across. What does this speech need to do? Okay, if I'm trying to persuade you to do things, I need to come up with topics or main points that highlight why you need to do the thing I want you to do. Okay, when I organize a lecture, I look at all the major topics I want you to take away from the lecture so that you're prepared to test. So do your job. What is the absolute takeaways your audience is going to need. And then you can start to really look at those main points. One really good strategy that your textbook offers you for the main points is the 1 week later test. I like that. It's where you ask yourself, after 1 week, what top 3 things should people remember? Okay. We know that audiences retain very, very little. So if I give you an hour lecture, I know, because science, that you're only going to remember about 2 to 3 actual minutes of content. Okay. What do I want those 3 minutes to be? And then you start brainstorming them out. You're going to make a list of all those top main points. Then you're going to think about the research you have or the research you need to do. Which of those main points is the most important? Okay. I could show you examples of how my brainstorming looks when I'm trying to decide the main points for a speech or for a lecture. It can get a little chaotic, but there are always ones that I think I know more about, or I have more stronger proof of, that kind of thing. Those are the ones where I will start to develop and make more profound, more in-depth things like that. So when you're thinking of your potential main points, there are a few rules you need to follow. When you're making a main point, you need to state them as actual claims. So not, what do you think, but this is what I think, right? Make them a fact, make them a claim. Your main points all go back to that thesis statement that you made in your introduction. There should be nothing in any main point that doesn't advance or develop that thesis statement. Most presentations have 3 or so really good main points. Never go over 5. And each main point should really be only about one idea. Okay. So let me show you how that looks. I like to write out, after my brainstorm, I've picked my 3 best main points and I sort of box them out. I treat them like individual little sections. I write the focus. So point A, what proof do I have that the claim I am making in this section is correct? I use in-text and full citations to support my main point. I make the arguments against my main point so that my perspective is very broad and well thought out. And I really just, excuse me, make this one big bucket of information about point A. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing with point B and point C, keeping them completely separate from each other. We don't need to go there yet. Let's just fully develop out these points. Now, remember, when you build a house, you go in a certain order, right? You need to work your presentation the same way you build a house. Okay, you have to do one thing at a time. So when you are doing your main points, focus on making them strong and sturdy on their own. Okay, keep them separate into buckets. And then what you can do is add an organizational plan, right? So these main points, A, B, and C, because they're all individually developed, they could technically go in any order, right? How do I decide what order is the most effective to present them in? Well, there's a couple of defined organizational plans for you to consider. The first one is called a time sequence pattern, so, or like a chronological organization. So if your speech is instructions or step-by-step, or discussing like a historical event that has occurred, right? Or showing someone how to do a task, you're going to want to organize your main points in a time sequence pattern. First this, then this. This happened, then that happened, right? In order. That's going to be very important to accomplish the purpose of your speech. If that's the purpose of your speech, you've got to put it in order. You could also organize your speech by spatial relations. This organizes things by relationship or physical locations. So if I was talking about, oh gosh, let's say politics, and I wanted to show you a map, and it was going to be, here's all the red states. Now here's all the blue states, right? So instead of talking about the country left to right, I'm organizing it by red states and blue states. Okay. Anything that's like spatially oriented, this is a really good way to organize the body points. Okay, so if you were, let's say, doing a presentation about why cats and dogs make good pets, you would do all of the cats, then all of the dogs. Or you would organize it like care, all of the care that's required for cats and dogs. Then all of the benefits of having cats and dogs, right? So you'd organize them by spatial relation. You can organize by topical sequence. This is when you organize your main points by themes. So divisions in a subject, dividing your topics into related parts. Apples and oranges, well, they're both fruit, right? This is really, really good for speeches where you're comparing things, or for problem solution type speeches. This is very, very good for persuasion, right? First, apples and then oranges, why they're the same, why they're different. Okay. You can talk about your main points in a cause and effect type of way. This event will have this effect. Pretty straightforward. This is the cause, this is the consequence. If you're trying to explain a phenomenon, why do people always take breaks at the same time every day? We'll talk about this, and then we'll talk about that. Okay, this is good for an informative speech, this cause-effect pattern. And then, of course, you have an actual problem solution. Depicts your issue in one main point, proposes a solution in another main point, another one that's good for persuasive speeches. You could organize your main points in this order if it makes sense for you. One very common method of organization, especially with persuasion, is Monroe's motivated sequence. This focuses on motivational appeals. Usually we see Monroe's used when you have a problem and the speaker, the presenter, is trying to give you the solution. So the problem already exists. Usually we don't need to establish that it's a problem, but we do have an established step here. Things like wearing seatbelts, okay? Wearing your mask in a pandemic, right? This is a good way to be persuasive when you're trying to show someone outcomes, effects, okay? Or proposing these solutions. So the first thing you need to do is get their attention. Obviously, we've already got that established. But this sequence is more about calling attention to the problem. So, for example, if we're going with seatbelts, you could say something like, I don't know, 4 out of 5 people that are in a car accident suffer severe injuries because they don't have their seatbelt. So I'm calling attention to the problem that I want to discuss. Then we establish the need for something to be done. Here's my statistics. Here's my evidence. This is kind of the background, okay? After you establish that there's a need, you have to satisfy that need. This is proposing your solution. So we've already established we need people to wear seatbelts. Here's how I propose to do that. Then we visualize the future. So you paint a picture of what the next steps would be if everybody followed your plan. And then you do a call to action or an actualization. This is where you ask your audience to actually do something, commit to something, wear your seatbelt, tell your friends to wear their seatbelt, things like that. So this is one way of organizing those main body points. It's called Monroe's motivated sequence. It's very, very good. Pretty standard in the public speaking tool belt. I would say that the only issues that I see with Monroe's are issues of I don't know, what's the best way to say it? People not being able to keep the steps straight, your audience. So sometimes you're really going to have to spell it out for them. Okay. Now, once you've decided how best to put these main points together, um, or which plan makes the most sense to you, then you can start rearranging your main points, really get them in the most effective way possible, or flow possible, I should say. So, does it make sense to go A, B, and C, or does it make more sense to go B, A, C, C, B, A? Whatever accomplishes your goal. All right, so that's the body. Okay. Well, we've got one more thing to do here. Well, we've got to wrap it all up. So, in your conclusion, you've got a couple of things to do. Contrary to popular belief, the conclusion is not just you saying in conclusion and then walking off stage. I have seen speeches where people say, okay, well, I'm done, and they leave. It kills me every time. I'm like, what? There's so much more to do here. You have a couple of items of business to check off. First thing you need to do is restate that thesis. Remind your audience what we were doing, what we were talking about, why we are here. You're going to summarize those main points that you covered, right? So in the intro, you told me what you were about to say. Then in the body, you said it. And then in the conclusion, you tell me what you just said. It's delightful, but it helps your audience recall the information later. Okay. And then you give that call to action to ask your audience to do something. Never put anything new in your conclusion. You're too late to add new stuff, right? So I want to go back a little bit to summarizing the main points. You want to do them in order, in the same order you presented it. So if you decided to go B, then A, then C, when you recap them at the end, you want to do them the same order, B, then A, then C. You do not want to do them identical or verbatim to the way you just presented them. You want to rephrase them or reiterate them, but you don't want to be redundant. You don't want to be repetitive, okay? Like I said, this is not the time to introduce any new evidence, no new points. You can show, the implications for what happens if your ideas are not followed, for example, but really no new support, no new evidence. This is your time to refocus, unify, reinforce your message, advance your purpose, advance that speech and your thesis, finish strong. Okay. Now, one thing I like to do is with your closing is to bookend my hook. So in the opening, I told you to entice your audience, right? I said, get their attention and intrigue them, entice them, right? In your closing, you have the opportunity to put a nice bookend on that action. So if, for example, in your opener, you hooked your audience by telling them some start of a story, in your closing, you would then finish that story. In your opening, if you shocked them with a startling statistic, in your closing, you might return to that statistic and talk about how your solution would fix it. So it makes it really nice, neat little package when you bookend your hook. Okay. I like to end with a challenge. Well, depending on the type of the speech, I like to usually end with a challenge. Like I challenge you to wear your seatbelt more. I challenge you to consider who you want to vote for, consider the ideals that you stand for, yada, yada, yada. Okay. So in your closing, you've got a few things to do. A lot of it is repetitive and repeating the intro and the main points. So really, when I'm constructing a presentation, for the most part, I write my body first. My intro and my conclusion are usually last, actually, because a lot of them have to do with the same information I've already developed in the body. So you can do it that way if you would like. So you've got an introduction where you've hooked your audience, stated your thesis, overviewed the main points you're about to cover. You've got your body, which is your main points with all the support and all the evidence you have to offer. You have a conclusion where you have wrapped up everything in a nice, tidy package, restated your thesis, reiterated your main points, you bookended your hook. You have a perfect organizationally structured presentation, yes? Well, there's one more little piece to consider, and that is everything in the middle. Okay. So when you're working on your presentation and going from main point to main point, um, you need to consider how best to get your audience there. So how do you get your audience from one section of your presentation to the others? Well, you're going to use something called a transition. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about deciding how those main points related to each other in order to organize them effectively. We get to go back to that when we are thinking about our transitions. So if point A and point B discuss two similar things, when you are moving between those two, you may transition with something like, in the same way as point A, point B is also effective. And then you go into the point B bulk. Okay. If one is, if point A is one thing and then point B is a contrast of it, you might say, however, despite point A's this, point B has this, right? So these little transitions are tiny words, tiny phrases. They link two ideas together and they help your organizational flow. Okay, you can move from one point to the next in a way that makes sense for your audience, in a way that takes them along on that journey. So you're going to need transitions that are logical for your audience. You'll need transition from the intro to your first main point, from in between each of those main points, and then when you move from your main points to the conclusion, you will need transitions there as well. Remember, you might think the connection between all of these things is very, very obvious, but don't assume that your audience feels the same way. They may be lost. Using good transition will help you bring them along on the journey and see it as clearly as you do. Okay. All right. So in conclusion, let's talk about those main points so you know how to prepare for your test. Everyone makes presentations, but the higher up you get in your career and the more successful you are, the more often you're going to have to create and deliver presentations. So it's important that you know how to do so. When you are making a presentation, you as the speaker have to do an analysis. You have to think about the audience, who they are, what they know, what they need to know. Basic demographic information can be helpful. Why are they listening to you? What are their attitudes toward whatever you're speaking about? Okay. You need to analyze yourself as a speaker. What is your goal for this speech? What is your knowledge of the subject? How do you need to appear credible? What kind of evidence can you give to really, really convince your audience? You need to analyze the goal and the occasion itself. So things like, why am I here? What do I want to get out of it? Even where am I speaking? What time of day is it? How long do I have to speak? What is the context? All of those pieces of analysis are important to being an effective speaker. You need to have general goals for your speech and specific goals. These will help you create your thesis. Is your goal to inform your audience or to persuade them? That knowing those types of things help you define what you want to do with it, how you reach your audience, how, when, and where you want them to react to what you're teaching them, okay? You need to understand the proper structure for a speech: intro, body, conclusion. I want you to know what pieces belong in each of those structured segments. I want you to know what a thesis statement is and why it's important. Understand the basic organizational patterns for the main points of speeches and know how to transition between all of those big buckets in your organizational structure in order to improve your flow and keep your audience on track. All right, folks, that is it for me. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about giving a speech, how to organize it, how to develop a thesis, all of the above, please holler at me. I am wildly available for you. But until next week, happy learning.